Now you will learn all the secrets of one of the largest battles in human history, the 2nd century BC. The Mediterranean is engulfed in the flames of the greatest conflict of antiquity, the Second Punic War. Two superpowers, Rome and Carthage, clash on the battlefield, and the fate of all Western civilization depends on the outcome of their struggle. The Roman Republic, confident in its power and right to rule the world, assembled the largest army in its history to put an end to one man once and for all, Hannibal Barca. The Carthaginian commander, inferior in everything except cunning, accepted the challenge. He turned the very logic of war into a weapon, forcing Roman power to work against itself. Watch the video to the end to find out how Hannibal tricked an 80,000-strong army into walking into a trap, and why his greatest triumph ultimately turned into defeat. What if I told you that the greatest army in the world was walking into a trap set not by weapons, but by psychology? On the eve of battle, the Roman camp was torn by contradictions. Command was divided between two consuls with completely opposite views on the war. Gaius Terentius Varro was a man of the people, a so-called new man who had built his career on bold and populist statements. Impulsive, ambitious, and desperate for military glory to bolster his political standing, he insisted on an immediate and crushing battle. He looked at his 80,000 legionaries and saw only undeniable numerical superiority, confident that one powerful blow from this machine would wipe the Carthaginians off the face of the earth. His colleague, Lucius Aemilius Paulus, was the complete opposite, an aristocrat, an experienced and cool-headed commander who had already tasted the bitterness of difficult campaigns. He understood that Hannibal was no ordinary opponent, but a military genius whose main strength lay in cunning and unpredictability. Paulus saw that the terrain for the battle, the plain near the Aufidus River, was simply ideal for the formidable Carthaginian cavalry, and he urged caution. He proposed to wear down Hannibal's army with small skirmishes, deprive them of supplies, and avoid open combat. But in Republican Rome, there was a law designed to protect against tyranny, which in this case proved fatal. The right of supreme command passed from one consul to another on a daily basis. Thanks to his excellent intelligence, Hannibal was well aware not only of the system, but also of the characters of both consuls. He waited patiently and calculatingly for the day when the impatient and self-confident Varro would be in command. Hannibal's army, on the other hand, was a monolith, united under his single and indisputable authority, which bordered on adoration. It consisted of battle-hardened veterans of various nations, steadfast Iberian swordsmen, fierce Gallic warriors, elusive Numidian horsemen, and resilient Libyan infantry. These men had crossed the icy passes of the Alps with him, shared all the hardships of the campaign, and won several resounding victories, so they trusted their leader's every word unconditionally. The Roman army was an incredibly powerful, superbly trained, and iron-disciplined, but predictable military machine. Its main strength and tactic was to build a monolithic wall of shields and spears that slowly and inexorably crushed the enemy. Hannibal, on the other hand, commanded a living, flexible, and multinational organism. In his army, each unit had its own unique strengths, and he, like a conductor, knew exactly when each of them should come into play. He thoroughly studied and understood the Roman mentality, their pride, their straightforwardness, and their thirst for a single decisive battle that would end the war in one fell swoop. Hannibal did not simply agree to fight on their terms, in open terrain where they felt stronger. He masterfully created the complete illusion that the Romans were fighting by their own rules, implementing their own plan. While the Romans confidently prepared to demonstrate their brute, unbreakable strength, Hannibal coolly prepared a complex chess game on the battlefield. He devised his plan to use their self-confidence and tactical predictability as the main weapon against them. The Roman legions were not just going into battle. They were going on stage to willingly play the role written for them by their most vicious and astute enemy. Varro, on his day of command, looked at the Carthaginian army, which was significantly inferior to his own in numbers, and already anticipated his triumph in Rome. Aemilius Paulus looked at the same field with a heavy heart and saw an obvious but ingeniously set trap, being completely powerless to change anything. This fatal contradiction in the minds of the two commanders became the very first and deepest crack in the monolith of Roman military power. Hannibal, meanwhile, was completely calm in his camp, his confidence built on knowledge. He knew his opponent better than the latter knew himself, having studied his strengths and weaknesses in previous battles. The coming battle was to be not a clash of muscles, but a clash of minds. Not a contest of armies, but a duel of commanders. And the Carthaginian was ready for this intellectual duel like no one else. Do you think divided leadership is a greater threat than a strong enemy? Share your opinion in the comments. Want to know the secret of how to turn the enemy's greatest strength into its fatal weakness? Hannibal did not choose the future battlefield at the river Alpheus by chance. It was a wide, almost flat plain, ideal for the actions of his main striking force, his excellent cavalry. To force the Romans to fight here, Hannibal made a bold move. He captured a large Roman food warehouse in the town of Cannae. This move not only provided his army with supplies, but also was a slap in the face to Roman pride, forcing the consuls to act. And so, on the day of Varro's command, the Roman army began to line up for battle. The consul used a time-tested but, in this case, misguided tactic. He decided not to stretch the front, but rather to compact it as much as possible, creating an incredibly deep and powerful formation. The legions were formed into maniples, but the depth of the formation was increased several times over. Varro's idea was simple: to deliver one crushing blow to the center of Hannibal's army. This human hammer was supposed to break through the enemy's defenses and split his army in two. Hannibal, seeing this formation, merely smiled. This was exactly the reaction he had hoped for. He began to line up his troops in a formation that was completely unthinkable at the time. The Carthaginian army was much larger and more diverse. Hasdrubal and Mago fielded about 70,000 infantrymen, 4,000 cavalrymen, and 32 war elephants. It was one of the largest armies ever assembled by Carthage. On the flanks of this arc, slightly behind and at an angle, he placed his best infantry, battle-hardened Libyan veterans. They were armed with Roman weapons captured in previous battles. Their role in this spectacle was still hidden from the enemy's eyes. Hannibal concentrated his main force at the very edges of his battle formation. On the left flank, against the Roman cavalry, he placed his heavy Iberian Gallic cavalry under the command of Hasdrubal. On the right flank, against the cavalry of the Roman allies, were the elusive Numidian horsemen of Mago. The formation was complete. It looked strange, with the center appearing weak and stretched out. For Varro, this was further confirmation that his plan would work. All he had to do was strike harder at this vulnerable arc. The trap was ready. The center of the Carthaginian army served as bait, but the jaws of this trap were not yet visible to the Romans. I will reveal the most closely guarded and most ingenious secret of Hannibal's strategy at Cannae. The key role in his diabolical plan was not assigned to elite African veterans or his famous and powerful cavalry. The fate of the entire battle and the entire war was deliberately placed in the hands of those whom any other commander would have hidden in the rear, the semi-reliable Gaulish and Iberian infantrymen at the very center of his army. These Celtic and Spanish warriors were immensely brave and incredibly fierce in the first attack, but they sorely lacked the iron, discipline, and training of the Roman legionaries. There was a sense of anticipation in the air. Soldiers from both armies understood that they were about to take part in one of those battles that would determine the course of history for decades to come. The only question was who would strike first. Their task was not simply to lose their battle, but to lose it according to a strictly defined scenario, performing the most difficult maneuver of all possible ones. Hannibal personally rode in front of their formation, addressing the leaders and soldiers in their native languages, explaining to each unit its unique role. They were not to stand and die, as this would lead to their rapid destruction. But more importantly, they were not to flee in panic under any circumstances. Their incredibly difficult mission was to slowly, methodically, step by step, yield to the monstrous pressure of the advancing Roman legions. Their formation, initially curved toward the Romans, had to bend smoothly and evenly inward, under thousands of tons of enemy metal and flesh. This required incredible self-control and absolute trust in their commander from the soldiers, because a controlled retreat under fierce enemy pressure is a maneuver that is almost impossible to execute. When the battle began, horns and trumpets blared deafeningly, and everything went exactly according to Hannibal's ingenious plan. The Roman legions, closing their famous scutum shields into a single wall, moved forward with measured, inexorable steps. Their monolithic, deeply echeloned mass crashed at full speed right into the center of the Carthaginian formation, into its most vulnerable part. Under this terrifying, inhuman pressure, the Gauls and Iberians, as ordered, began to slowly and reluctantly retreat. To the Roman centurions and legionaries in the front ranks, it looked exactly as they had expected. The barbarians had faltered and were about to flee. This apparent success intoxicated them, and they rushed forward with redoubled energy, putting all their fury into the pursuit and striving to crush the center as quickly as possible. The Roman legionaries on the flanks, seeing their comrades successfully breaking through in the center, instinctively and without orders began to move towards it. Everyone wanted to take part in the glorious breakthrough and the coming victory. Because of this, the formation of the entire Roman army, already unnaturally deep by Varro's orders, began to compress even more in width and stretch forward, turning into a clumsy column. The soldiers in the rear ranks, unable to see the overall picture of the battle, blindly pushed forward. Thus, the convex crescent of the Carthaginians gradually turned into a concave arc, a deadly embrace. The Carthaginian center bent deeper and deeper, luring the Romans behind it. The huge Roman army, like a full-flowing river, rushed into this gap, with each passing minute moving further and further away from its flanks and rear. From the hills where the Roman reserves stood, it looked like a resounding and unconditional victory for Rome. But in reality, tens of thousands of legionnaires, without realizing it, obediently and eagerly walked into a giant trap. They completely lost their main tactical advantage, maneuverability and the width of their formation, rapidly turning into a dense, compressed, and completely uncontrollable human mass. Hannibal, risking everything, was personally at the center of this hell, among his retreating Gauls and Iberians, directing their movements and maintaining their fighting spirit. One wrong step, one stray arrow, one wavering unit, and his entire army would have been destroyed. But only by being there could he personally control the main and most fragile element of his ingenious trap. And thanks to his presence, this element worked flawlessly. Guess what happened next? While the Roman legions triumphantly and eagerly pressed Hannibal's vulnerable center, they completely lost sight of what was happening on the flanks of the Carthaginian formation. There, in perfect order and full combat readiness, stood two large detachments of elite African infantry. With icy calm, they watched as their Gallic allies lured the enemy deeper in. These hardened Libyan veterans were Hannibal's best and most reliable soldiers, his old guard who had been through fire and water with him. They were impeccably disciplined, full of strength, and, ironically, many of them were armed with captured Roman weapons and armor, taken from those who had fallen in previous battles. And now it was time for these professional warriors to enter the fray and deliver the decisive blow. When the Roman legions had advanced far enough into the trap set for them, enthusiastically pursuing the retreating Gauls and Iberians, their flanks were completely unprotected. All the energy and attention of the Roman soldiers was focused on one goal, the attack ahead, and they did not expect a blow from the side. At this most critical moment, when the trap was ready, Hannibal gave his main order, which changed the course of history. The African infantry, which had been standing motionless until then, like two dark walls at the edges of the field, instantly sprang into action. They did not attack forward, cutting off the retreating enemy. They performed a perfect, finely tuned maneuver, a simultaneous 90-degree turn inward, toward the open and vulnerable flanks of the Roman legions that had been drawn into the breach. This maneuver was executed with parade precision. Now the Roman legions, which were still pressing with their last ounce of strength on the resisting center, suddenly received a crushing blow on both of their unprotected flanks. Fresh, energetic, and well-organized African veterans furiously crashed into the disorganized, stretched-out Roman ranks, which were completely unprepared for such a turn of events. The effect of this double blow was not just stunning, it was catastrophic. Rome's triumphant advance was instantly drowned in blood and confusion. The legionaries, suddenly attacked from three sides, from the front by the exhausted but still fighting Gauls, and from the sides by the relentless Africans, found themselves in a steel vise. Their incredibly deep and narrow formation, which was supposed to be the key to victory, now became their deadly curse, depriving them of any hope of salvation. The soldiers in the rear ranks of the huge Roman column could not see or understand what was happening in front and on the sides. They only heard the sounds of battle and, by inertia, continued to press forward, further compacting the front ranks. This pressure prevented their comrades from turning around, regrouping, and organizing a defense against sudden flank attacks. The great Roman army began to literally devour itself. The huge, powerful military machine of the Republic turned into a compressed, disorganized, and panicked human mass in a matter of minutes. The legionaries, trapped in the center of this crush, could not even raise their shields or swing their swords to defend their lives. They were tightly squeezed on all sides by the bodies of their own comrades, becoming easy prey for the spears of the Africans. Hannibal's trap, carefully planned and flawlessly executed, began to slowly and inexorably close. Rome's main striking force, its legendary heavy infantry, was trapped, surrounded, and completely immobilized. But even at this point, the outcome of the battle was not yet decided, for the Romans still had one last trump card to play. The Roman infantry was trapped on three sides, but what about their powerful cavalry? In the next chapter, you will learn how Hannibal solved this problem. Parallel to the drama unfolding in the center, an equally important battle was raging on the flanks. Hannibal knew that his plan to encircle the infantry would only work if he could neutralize the Roman cavalry, and for this task, he used his best horsemen. On the left wing of the Carthaginian army, Hasdrubal's heavy cavalry, consisting of Iberians and Gauls, attacked the Roman civilian cavalry. The Roman horsemen, though brave, could not withstand Hannibal's heavier and more experienced cavalry. The battle was short and fierce. The Roman formation was crushed and overturned. Those who were not killed on the spot fled, but Hasdrubal did not pursue them. He had a more important task. On the other flank, things were no better for the Romans. The light and fast Numidian cavalry of Mago engaged the cavalry of the Roman allies. The Numidians did not engage in direct combat, but circled around the enemy, showering them with javelins and exhausting them with constant attacks. It was at this moment that Hasdrubal, having defeated his wing, made his second brilliant maneuver of the day. He did not turn back, but led his heavy cavalry in an arc around the entire line of the Roman army. He rushed to Megarbale's aid. In this way, Scipio completely controlled the geometry of the battle. He forced Hasdrubal to fight where he had an overwhelming advantage, on the flanks. And in the center, where the Carthaginians had the advantage, the battle never began. While the Roman legionaries were trapped in an infantry cauldron in the center, they lost their cavalry cover. They were blind and defenseless. The final act of the greatest encirclement in history was about to begin. Hannibal's cavalry now completely dominated the field. It no longer had any opponents. This meant that it could strike wherever it wanted. Hasdrubal gathered his horsemen once more. He saw before him a huge mass of Roman infantry, huddled together and attacked on three sides. All that remained was to close the ring. Victory in the cavalry battle was not just a tactical success. It was the key that allowed the main door of the trap to be locked. And that key was now in Hannibal's hands. Ready to learn the shocking truth about how the trap snapped shut? Having destroyed the Roman cavalry, The combined forces of Hasdrubal and Mago had complete freedom of action, and they directed their attack at the only place that the Roman infantry still had no defense: the rear. The Carthaginian cavalry charged at full speed into the rear ranks of the Roman legions. At that moment, the circle was complete. The greatest army Rome had ever fielded found itself completely and hopelessly surrounded. What happened next was no longer a battle in the classical sense. It was the methodical destruction of a trapped enemy. The Romans were attacked from all four sides: from the front by the Gauls, from the flanks by the Africans, and from the rear by the cavalry. Panic and despair gripped those who were surrounded. Command was completely lost, and Consul Aemilius Paulus fell in battle. The soldiers, trapped in a dense mass, could neither fight nor flee.
You are trapped, Romans! Your horses are spent! Watch the gap! Hold your ground!
There was no room to maneuver. A legionnaire could not swing his sword without hitting his comrade. Shields, which had been their main protection, now only got in the way, squeezing the crowd even tighter. The dust raised by thousands of feet and hooves mixed with the cries and clanging of weapons. Visibility was almost zero. Many soldiers did not fall from the enemy's weapons, but were simply crushed by their own comrades in this monstrous crush. The Roman military machine, built on order and discipline, had turned into its opposite. It was the agony of an army. Strength had become weakness, and numbers had become a death sentence. Battle lasted for many hours, but its outcome was decided the moment the last Carthaginian horseman entered the rear of the Roman army. It was complete and absolute tactical superiority. Hannibal stood on a hill and watched his masterpiece unfold. His plan, based on a deep understanding of his enemy's psychology and the perfect coordination of all parts of his diverse army, worked flawlessly. He turned the battlefield into a giant cauldron. The greatest army in the world was methodically dismantled. But what was the human cost of this tactical masterpiece? In the next chapter, we will examine the consequences. When the battle subsided in the evening, the scene that unfolded on the field at Cannae was horrific. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers lay on a small patch of land. It was the most crushing defeat in the history of the Roman Republic. The losses were catastrophic, not only in terms of quantity, but also in terms of quality. Along with the ordinary legionaries, the consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus was killed. About 80 senators and hundreds of other representatives of the Roman aristocracy also fell. In fact, in one day, Rome lost a significant part of its ruling class and military command. The news of the defeat at Cannae caused shock and panic in the Eternal City. Rumors circulated about the complete destruction of the army. Mourning was declared in Rome, and the city gates were closed. Women in the streets mourned their husbands, sons, and brothers. The Republic was on the verge of collapse. At the same time, Hannibal's army suffered incomparably fewer losses. He lost mainly soldiers from his Gallic center, who took the brunt of the attack. His best troops, African veterans and cavalry, suffered minimal damage. Hannibal's strategy worked perfectly. He sacrificed his pawns to lure the enemy into a trap and destroy their pieces. He did not just win the battle, he destroyed an entire enemy army while preserving the core of his own. After the battle, the Carthaginians collected a huge amount of trophies. Thousands of gold rings were taken from the defeated Romans, a sign of belonging to the equestrian and senatorial classes. These rings were sent to Carthage as proof of the greatest victory. It seemed that the fate of the war had been decided. Rome was broken, its armies destroyed, its spirit crushed. The way to Rome was open. The rain and mud also hindered their pursuers, but the organized Roman cohorts coped with the difficulties much better than the demoralized Carthaginian crowd. The Romans surrounded the enemy camp, completely cutting off their retreat. The siege began. But it was at this moment of greatest triumph that the seeds of his future defeat were sown. He had won the main battle, but the war was far from over. Immediately after the battle, amid the jubilation of the weary soldiers, Hannibal was approached by his most brilliant cavalry commander, Mago. He was covered in dust and blood, his eyes burning with the excitement of battle and the anticipation of final victory. Excited and insistent, he begged his commander not to waste a single minute and to take advantage of the opportunity. Hannibal proposed a bold and simple plan: to immediately take a select detachment of fresh Numidian cavalry and march straight to Rome without stopping. He passionately argued that after 5 days of this rapid advance, they would be dining on the sacred Capitoline Hill in the very heart of the enemy's power. Scipio once again demonstrated his patience and strategic wisdom. He did not succumb to the temptation of a quick but bloody assault. He allowed time, hunger, and despair to do their work. Inside the besieged Carthaginian camp, despair reigned. Morale was completely crushed. The soldiers understood that their commanders had led them to disaster and now could offer no way out. Hasdrubal and Mago also realized that the situation was completely hopeless. Continuing to resist was pointless. It was already impossible to save the army, and they decided to save themselves. Hearing this calm and measured refusal, Magarbale could not contain his disappointment and anger. In his heart, he uttered a phrase that became legendary and went down in history for centuries. "You know how to win, Hannibal,
but you don't know how to use victory."
After these bitter words, according to historians, he silently turned and left, realizing that a unique opportunity had been missed. Historians and military theorists still fiercely debate whether Hannibal's decision was his greatest mistake. On the one hand, Magarbal's supporters are absolutely right. Rome in those days was indeed in a state of panic and virtually defenseless. The sudden appearance of the Carthaginian army at the very gates could have broken the will of the Senate and forced the city to surrender to avoid an assault and massacre. On the other hand, Hannibal was, above all, a cold realist and pragmatist. He understood perfectly well that even if his cavalry reached Rome, it would not be able to storm its mighty walls. His genius and his army were made for victories in field battles, for complex maneuvers and tactical tricks, not for a long and exhausting siege, which required completely different resources and skills. Perhaps he sincerely hoped that the news of the crushing defeat at Cannae would make the Roman Senate reconsider and ask for peace on his terms. It is possible that he never wanted to destroy Rome itself. His goal was to destroy Rome's system of military alliances in Italy, deprive it of power, and restore Carthage to its former greatness and control over the Mediterranean. Be that as it may, this moment of refusal became a turning point in the war. By exercising caution, Hannibal gave Rome what it did not have at that moment, and what was more valuable than any army: time. And his enemies, having come to their senses, took full advantage of this priceless gift with their characteristic steadfastness and perseverance. The decision not to march on Rome was perhaps Hannibal's biggest and only strategic mistake in his entire brilliant military career. He masterfully won all his battles, defeating several consular armies in a row. But at the decisive moment, he missed his only chance to deliver a knockout blow that could have ended the entire war. This delay allowed the Romans to recover from the initial shock, quell the panic, gather their forces, and completely rethink their entire strategy of warfare. They returned to their tactics of attrition, avoiding open combat. In the end, Hannibal's greatest tactical victory did not bring him ultimate strategic triumph. Rome's reaction to the disaster at Cannae revealed its true strength. It was not the power of its legions on the battlefield, but the unyielding will of its citizens and Senate. Instead of seeking peace, Rome prepared for total war for survival. Quintus Fabius Maximus, nicknamed Cunctator, meaning the delayer, took the helm of the Republic. His strategy, which had previously been scorned, now became state policy. Rome refused to engage in any open battles with Hannibal. The new tactic was to wear down the enemy. The Roman armies followed Hannibal closely, attacking his foragers and stragglers, but never engaging in a general battle. This war of attrition deprived Hannibal of his main trump card, his tactical genius in open combat. Rome demonstrated an incredible ability to mobilize. New legions were formed. Even young men who had not yet reached conscription age were drafted into the army, slaves were ransomed, and criminals were armed. The Senate made an unprecedented decision: not to ransom the prisoners captured at Cannae. It was a cruel but clear signal to Hannibal and the whole world. Rome does not negotiate. Rome does not surrender. The Republic was ready to sacrifice its citizens for the sake of ultimate victory. While Hannibal was in Italy, unable to receive significant reinforcements from Carthage, Rome waged war on other fronts. The Roman armies, under the command of the young and talented commander Publius Cornelius Scipio, moved the fighting to Spain, depriving Hannibal of his main supply base. As the years passed, Hannibal's army, constantly in a foreign country, slowly dwindled. His veterans were aging, and new recruits could not replace them. He was like a lion in a cage, still dangerous but locked in Italy and unable to deliver a decisive blow. Rome, with its vast human and material resources, gradually regained its power. The defeat at Cannae taught it a bitter lesson. The Romans learned to respect their enemy and adapt to his methods. Ultimately, it was this resilience and ability to learn from its mistakes that allowed Rome to win the war. Hannibal defeated the legions, but he could not defeat Rome itself. The Republic withstood the most terrible blow in its history and only grew stronger. The Battle of Cannae, while a triumph for Hannibal, also marked the beginning of his end. The Battle of Cannae has gone down in military history as the gold standard of tactical artistry. It has become a textbook example of a battle fought to completely destroy the enemy. The term Cannae has become synonymous with the ideal encirclement and defeat of the enemy.
Move those carts. Advance the legions. Steady pace.
The double envelopment maneuver, or pincer, which Hannibal used so brilliantly, was studied by commanders of all subsequent eras. From the Roman general Scipio, who used elements of Hannibal's tactics to defeat him, to the generals of the modern era and the present day. Cannae demonstrated several key military principles to the world. First, the importance of understanding the psychology of the enemy. Hannibal won because he predicted every move of the overconfident Roman command. Second, the battle demonstrated the decisive role of cavalry in open terrain. Control of the flanks and the ability to strike from the rear proved more important than numerical superiority in infantry. Third, Hannibal proved the superiority of a flexible and multifunctional army over a monolithic but unwieldy military machine. He used the strengths of each of his units to achieve the overall goal. However, the legacy of Cannae has another side. This battle was a harsh lesson for Rome, forcing it to completely reform its army and strategy. The Romans learned to fight in a new way, which ultimately led to their victory in the Second Punic War. We can see that the Battle of Cannae was not just a clash between two armies. It was a battle between two philosophies of warfare. The Roman one, based on strength and discipline, and the Carthaginian one, based on cunning and flexibility. And on that day, cunning won a crushing victory. Hannibal Barca did not simply defeat an enemy that outnumbered him. He made the enemy's own strength work against them, turning the Roman legions into an instrument of their own destruction. It was a tactical masterpiece that still amazes us today with its boldness and elegance. However, the story of Cannae teaches us something else. Even the most brilliant victory on the battlefield does not guarantee victory in war. Fortitude, political will, and the ability to learn from mistakes can prove to be more important weapons in the long run. What part of Hannibal's plan do you think was the most ingenious? The false center of the Gauls, or the maneuvers of his cavalry? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes.